What should we do next?
Let's talk about something that is very funny.
Yes.
Monty Python's Life of Brian, which is having what's being billed as a 40th anniversary release after Michael Palin's roticisms as Pontius Pilate.
Love it.
This was originally released in 1979, of course. Brian, who's played by Graham Chapman, is born in a neighbouring stable to Christ in Bethlehem and comes to be mistaken for the Messiah. I mean,
He's not the Messiah.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I wondered how long that would take before you just flew into a quote. I mean, this is actually what's interesting about revisiting Monty Python's Life of Brian now is the funny stuff is so familiar that it's more interesting, I think, as a cultural object than a comedy. I think I'm basically unique among critics in thinking this is the least straightforwardly funny of the three main Monty Python films.
Interesting.
I think Holy Grail is just relentlessly uproarious. It's such a bombardment of great gags all the way through. And I think Meaning of Life is sort of weird and abrasive in a way that their sort of edgiest, strangest work got to on the TV series. It went to a new level on Meaning of Life. But I think of the three films, without doubt, the most important is Life of Brian, because it manages to take this Python formula, which is like applying parochial British attitudes, stroke accents, stroke ideas to an absurd context. In this case, the context is the biblical epic. And it ranges across this enormous list of comic registers. So there's farce in there, there's slapstick, there's satire, and there's also grappling with these big metaphysical concepts about heaven and earth. What is there beyond our death? If you think, the final scene being this basically chorus line song staged on a mass crucifixion is just such a, it's very funny, but it's also a very bold gambit to leave a film on. It's basically to have someone singing about how you come into this world with nothing. You leave this world with nothing. It all means nothing. Exactly. So there's a lot kind of to be in awe of, perhaps, than to laugh at now, I think. But purely that's possibly because I'm just so familiar with it. Having said that, here's a clip of a scene that still cracks me up to this day.
They bled us white, the bastards. They've taken everything we had. And not just from us, from our fathers, and from our fathers' fathers.
And from our fathers' fathers' fathers.
Yeah.
And from our fathers' 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 fathers.
Yeah, all right, Stan, don't labour the point. And what have they ever given us in return?
The aqueduct?
What?
The aqueduct.
Oh, yeah, they did give us that. That's true, yeah.
And the sanitation.
Oh, yeah, the sanitation, Reg. Remember what the city used to be like?
Yeah, all right, I'll grant you, the aqueduct and sanitation are two things the Romans have done.
And the roads.
Well, yeah, obviously the roads. I mean, the roads go without saying, don't they? But apart from the sanitation, the aqueduct and the roads...
Irrigation. Medicine. Education.
Yeah, all right, fair enough.
And the wine.
Yeah, that's something we'd really miss, Reg, if the Romans left.
Public baths.
And it's safe to walk in the streets at night now, Reg.
Yeah, they certainly know how to keep order. Let's face it, the only ones who could in a place like this.
All right, but apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a fresh water system and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
Brought peace.
Oh, peace. Shut up!
Just even having someone in Galilee called Reg is brilliant.
Do you know what's really interesting is that my 10-year-old and his mates are all starting to watch these.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's kind of, and I think that, if you think about it, it's brilliant that the 40th anniversary has been celebrated because they're such important films, they're such important comedic talent and writers and collections of people that if you think about if they didn't exist, what we wouldn't have now, because they paved the way and they inspired so many people in terms of. And I also think as well, I remember I was lucky enough to do a kind of chat a number of years ago with a whole group of them, Terry Gillingham and Michael Palin, and they said then that if it was now, they would never have got Monty Python commissioned as a TV show, as films, sort of thing. And it's quite an interesting kind of concept to try and get
because it was so odd, or because it was
so out there.
Right.
You know, in terms of like, it was taking risks and it was kind of covering subject matter that no one else was doing, and no one else was sort of talking about those types of things in that type of way.
I mean, it picks up the baton as well from the Goon Show. And what's so great about Life of Brian is that there's this small cameo by Spike Milligan, who I think was on holiday in the area randomly. I think he was visiting a battlefield or something, and he happened to stop by the set to see what was happening. And they invited him to make this cameo in the scene where it's when Brian loses his sandals, and the crowd that's following him debates as to what this means, you know, how they should they live their life not wearing sandals, or what the kind of religious significance of this dropped sandal is. And Spike Milligan is the guy who is left behind as the group moves away. He's coming up with his theories and then realises no one's listening and just potters off. And I think he turned up on the set, they put him in costume, and then they shot the wide shot in the morning, and then everyone broke for lunch, and then they were going to come back in and do his close-up and realised he'd vanished. He'd just wandered off with the costume. So there's this brilliant kind of, I mean, and the fact it doesn't look half-finished at all in the film, but there's this brilliant half-finished cameo just basically shot in long shot where he's talking to himself, wanders off. And it's this brilliant sort of passing of the torch moment, because Spike Milligan's work on the Goon Show with Harry Seacombe and Peter Sellers was instrumental in sort of preparing the ground for the Pythons, just as you said, what the Pythons did then prepped the way, for all sorts, for
Exactly.
you know,
Not
Vic,
just
Vic and Bob for
comedies.
Not the 9 o'clock
Yeah.
News, for Chris Morris, so much. I was also struck while watching this that, of course, you know, the outcry around the film at the time was a huge part of its cultural status, and it was banned in a number of counties in the UK. Mm-hmm. It was banned, a blanket ban in a few European countries as well, in Norway, and in fact it was actually advertised in Sweden as being the film so funny they banned it in Norway.
I love that.
But it made me think, what kind of comedy could achieve that today? Because the last thing I can think of that caused that much of an upset, I mean, everything causes a degree of upset now because of the nature of social media. Everyone can get angry about something if they choose to do so. But the last thing that caused that sort of upswell was probably the Brass Eye special in 2001, where there's this sense of, as it was with Life of Brian, you want to drag the creators onto television and have them explain themselves, which of course happened with Life of Brian. They were hauled up by Malcolm Muggeridge and the Bishop of Southwark to explain the thinking behind this. Was it blasphemous? We think it is blasphemous. Well, it's not blasphemous. And there was this big discussion happened. And I'm kind of desperate for something, another piece of comedy to do that now.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know what it could be.
I guess the kind of your Spinal Taps and stuff as well. They weren't kind of pulled up because of them pushing boundaries in terms of what they were talking about, or being seen as kind of dangerous in some way. But that kind of comedy, I guess, of taking risks as well.
Yes, exactly. And it's finding fault with organised religion in this incredibly provocative way. Also with identity politics and purity politics. And it's strange to think that these topics that they alighted on 40 years ago are still incredibly relevant now. I don't think they probably did it at the time thinking they were going to be spoofing something that was going to be this eternal issue, this long-lasting thing. It felt of its time, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think Ricky Gervais's Afterlife actually is something that addresses kind of, be it grief, be it religion, sort of within that world.
Oh, so like big metaphysical themes.
Totally.
Yeah.
In terms of comedy approach and things like that as well, is something that I think is kind of going places that no one's ever sort of gone before with that type of thing as well.
But it's exciting to think that, there are going to be people who are discovering this for the first time.
Yeah.
And I remember, the Monty Python films. I think Life of Brian I discovered on VHS at Woodwind Camp or something as a teenager. That's how I rolled, basically.
It's word of mouth.
It is. And it's this idea that, you absorb it and then you can regurgitate it throughout your life. And these lines just pop up. He's not the Messiah, he's very naughty boy, as you did earlier,
Exactly. I love the idea you can pass it down as well, which, kind of when your kids get to an age, you can go, oh, you've got to watch.
I mean, there are certain scenes in this that I wouldn't necessarily push kids to watch.
Yes.
But,
Of a certain age.
Yes,
Children of a certain age. But it is that kind of thing that, because it does kind of that slapstick element to it and all that kind of thing, and the silliness of it is just... I think it's got a huge appeal.
Yep.
Definitely. Try and see it on the big screen if you can as well, in terms of that's the
This is
great
the other
thing.
great thing about it. So it was directed by Terry Jones, but art directed by Terry Gilliam. And the mise en scène, if I can be so hideously pretentious, is extraordinary. I mean, the clutter and the composition, that shot where Brian looks out of his balcony window and sees the assembled throng underneath. The composition of that is incredible. I mean, it's almost Tarkovskian in how beautifully done it is. And there's a sense that comedy is funny when it's small, and when it gets beyond a certain scale, the laughs somehow get lost in the bigness. You know, they're shooting on sets used by Zeffirelli for his Jesus of Nazareth epic, you know, and yet it's still intensely funny.
Yeah. And had it not been for George Harrison, it would never have been made. So there we go.